Corneal and conjunctival reflex are the important cranial nerve reflexes. In this video, I am going to tell you what are these reflexes, what are their pathway with their clinical significance. Hey everyone, welcome back to HM Learnings. I am Harshita, the creator of HM Learnings, where students come to clear their concept and to get the study material. Make sure that you have subscribed my channel. So today we are back with the next video of reflexes, that is on corneal and conjunctival reflex. In the previous video we have seen about what are reflexes, and we have seen and talked a lot about that there are cranial nerve reflexes as well as spinal nerve reflexes, and we have already finished about one of a very important cranial nerve reflex, that is the pupillary light reflex, its pathway and its clinical significance in the previous video. So in this video we are going to deal with the another cranial nerve reflexes, which are the corneal and the conjunctival reflex. So we will the corneal and the conjunctival reflex, these two are something which is very similar. Their efferent and the efferent are almost the same. Only thing which is different is that in the corneal reflex the stimulus is on the cornea, whereas in the conjunctival reflex the stimulus is on the conjunctiva. So first we will see the corneal reflex. So as we have already discussed in the previous video that whenever we are going to see the reflex, we will first define what is reflex, and in that definition we consider two things, that is what is the stimulus and what is the response. So corneal reflex is blink in response to touch on eye. So if there is a touch on the cornea by a cotton, or there is a light stimulus on the cornea, or there is any foreign body which is touching the cornea, in response to that stimulus a blink happens. So blink means what? That there is the rapid closure of the eyelid and it will be followed by the opening of the eyelid. So blink includes not only the closure but the opening also. So it is having downward motion of the eyelids, the turning point, and the outward motion. The upward motion, and it is also including the interblink interval. So basically blink is not just the closure. So whenever you are like doing this also in the practicals, you see that when the cotton has been touched on the cornea, it is involving the closure and then the sudden and the subsequent opening. So blink in response to touch on the cornea is the corneal reflex. And as we know that we have to define the reflex in terms of by including all of its components. Like the stimulus is here the touch on the cornea, response is a blink which is rapid closing and opening of eyelid, receptor, like we know that the reflex arc is having what? It is having receptor, it is having efferent, it is having the synapses in the center, it is then having the efferent and the effector, and finally the response. So receptor here is the mechanoreceptors, the touch receptors on the cornea, or the free nerve endings also. Then the effector here is what? The muscle orbiculus oculi, which is causing the closure of the eyelid, and the elevator papillae, which is causing the opening of the eyelid. So both of these muscles are the effectors. The efferent here is what? The touch receptors are there on the cornea, and we know that the touch sensation of the face is by the trigeminal nerve. So here the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve is the efferent. So here the efferent is the facial nerve, which is innervating the orbiculus oculi, which is causing the closure of the eyelid. And another efferent, there are two efferents here. Another efferent is the oculomotor nerve, which is innervating the elevator papillae, which is causing the opening of the eyelid. So there is efferent and there are two efferents here. So this reflex is somehow different from the other reflexes, because here the response is the blink, which is involving the first contraction of the orbiculus oculi and then second contraction of elevator papillae. So that is how it is having two muscles, two efferents. So this is showing the pathway of the corneal reflex, and this reflex is the center here is the midbrain, and this reflex is involving many nucleus, because of which there are certain peculiarities or the crucial points related to this reflex, which we discuss in the next slide. So the nuclei which is being involved is, we know that the sensory nucleus is definitely being there, trigeminal sensory nucleus will be there, and the motor nucleus of the facial and the oculomotor will be there. So the same thing is there written here, the main sensory trigeminal nucleus, which is one of the nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. One more nuclei of the trigeminal nerve is involved, which is a spinal accessory nucleus, and then there is facial nucleus and the oculomotor nucleus. In between there are many interneurons also in this pathway. So we can start like looking in this diagram to understand that what is here. So I'll just turn on the pointer. Okay, so this is the stimulus, a sensory stimulus, which could be touch, which could be light, or any foreign body touching the cornea. So this is the lining present over the eye, which is the cornea, and from here the sensation, this is activating the mechanoreceptors. The sensations are going to be taken up by the sensory neuron, which is a trigeminal nerve, the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve, and this is going to the terminating on this nuclei of the trigeminal nerve in the midbrain. So it is going to terminate on the main sensory trigeminal nucleus, as well as some of them are terminating on the spinal trigeminal nucleus. So this diagram is showing the spinal trigeminal nucleus, but some of the fibers are also terminating on the, like some of the fibers, if I can draw here, some of the fibers are also terminating on the sensory trigeminal nucleus. This is important point to remember, that some fibers are going to the sensory trigeminal nucleus, some fibers are going to the spinal trigeminal nucleus. So from there, both of these nuclei are sending the projections to the facial nucleus. This is also sending the projection. This purple neuron is actually the projection starting from the spinal trigeminal nucleus to the facial nucleus, and here also the sensory trigeminal nucleus is also sending the projections to the facial nucleus. And from the facial nucleus, the efferent will start, which is the motor neuron, the facial nerve, which is going to the orbiculus oculi. Now from here, this diagram is not showing so from this spinal trigeminal nucleus, projections will also go to the oculomotor nuclei, which is then basically from there the oculomotor nerve will start, which is going to the elevator papillae to cause the opening of the eyelid. Okay, so this is a kind of a brief overview to this reflex. This reflex seems to be little confusing, because it is involving two efferents and two muscles, and also many things are going to many nuclei. So we will see further about this reflex. So corneal reflex is also called as a blink reflex, because the response is a blink. So this blink response, now this blink, now something which is important to remember here is that the corneal reflex is something which we can do in clinics, like by using a cotton. So that is a corneal reflex. This is also called as a blink reflex, but blink reflex is usually more a kind of a term which is more used in electrophysiological labs, where the electrical stimulus is being given to have the blink response. So in that case, we are actually recording from these two muscles. So in that case, we are actually having more components in the response. We are having two components. So when you are doing it in the in your clinics, that is as a clinical test, you won't be able to see that there are two components of this reflex. But when you are doing it in the electrophysiological lab, you can really appreciate that there are two components of this reflex. So blink reflex is a term which you can definitely use, but this term is like more known by the ones who are doing this reflex in electrophysiological labs. So now the important, as I said, that this reflex is like something which is different from the other reflexes. It is having its own crucial points, which is critical to remember, is that if you are stimulating the trigeminal nerve of one eye. Like if you are actually touching the cotton on the right eye, you will see that there is there is basically the bilateral response which is coming. So both the eyelids are going to be closed and then open. So blink response is going to come bilaterally. So that is what is written here, is that ipsilateral stimulation of trigeminal nerve elicits blink response bilaterally. Now how it is that happening? What is the pathway for that? So we have already seen that we will just again revise the pathway in order to get a more clarity, that the receptors are being there which is present on the cornea, from where the trigeminal nerve is going to be started, which is the efferent, and from there the efferent will actually go to the center, which is the midbrain, and in the midbrain it will terminate. Some of are going to terminate in the main sensory trigeminal nucleus, some of them are going to the spinal trigeminal nucleus, and from there the projections will go to the facial nucleus, and then facial nerve, and finally the muscle which is causing the downward motion of the eyelid. Now from the spinal trigeminal nucleus, the projections will also go to the oculomotor nuclei, which is taking it to the oculomotor nerve, which is taking it to the muscle, which is causing the upward motion of the eyelid, that is the opening. So a blink response. Now this is happening bilaterally, this closure and opening, both of them are happening bilaterally. The blink is happening bilaterally. How? Another thing which I already told you is that the blink reflex, if you are doing it in the electrophysiological lab, you can see that it is having early response and it is having late response. Okay, so now how is that happening? Let's see talking about that. So this is, suppose we take it as a right eye. So you have stimulated on the right eye, and this V1 projection is starting from the receptors present on the right eye, and then this V1 is going to the two nuclei here. This is the main sensory nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Some of the projections are going to here, and some of the projections you can see are going to the spinal accessory nucleus, which is this nucleus, which is also a trigeminal nucleus. So some fibers are going to here and some fibers are going to here. Now from here what is happening, that the main sensory nucleus is sending projections only to the ipsilateral facial nuclei, that is to the right facial nuclei. So right facial nuclei is getting the innervation from the right main sensory trigeminal nucleus, and from there the right facial nerve will go and will trigger the response in the right eye, that is the closure, that is the right orbicularis oculi, and there will be closure of the right eyelid. This is forming the early component of the blink reflex, which is called as the R1. So this is one is being written here is ipsilateral trigeminal nerve gives impulse to two trigeminal nucleus, which is the main sensory nucleus and the spinal accessory nucleus. As I already said, the main sensory nucleus and the spinal accessory nucleus. Now the main sensory nucleus of trigeminal nerve will project only to the ipsilateral facial nerve nuclei, which is this. So right will go to the right. This is basically a pathway which is having almost two synapses. This is quicker and the response will come earlier, and this is called as a early response or a R1 response, which is seen only in the right side, that is the site of the stimulation. Now the next thing which is going to be important, that how, okay, this is something which we like, which is very well understandable, ki we are stimulating on the right side and we are getting the response from the right side. How we are getting the response from the opposite side is what we are looking for. So now the thing which is there, that some of the projections are going to the the spinal accessory nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. Now from here I change the color of the pen. Now from here, that is this nucleus, the trigeminal nucleus, spinal accessory nucleus of trigeminal nerve is going not only to the ipsilateral side, that is to the right side facial nucleus, but also to the contralateral side, that is the left facial nucleus, and this will go here, the left facial nerve will arise, which will go to the left left orbiculus oculi, causing the downward motion of the eyelids. So this is called as a late component. So this is what is written here. The spinal accessory nucleus of trigeminal nerve will project to bilateral facial nerve nuclei, both right and left. So this will bring the response which is called as an R2 response, which is not only happening on the ipsilateral side but also on the contralateral side. So this is what is something which is, you can see here that the stimulus is basically on the right side. Okay, so on the right side, basically the blink response is having two components, R1 and R2. Okay, so R1 response is coming on the ipsilateral side, and this is because of the pathway which we have discussed, the pathway from where the V1, the projections are going to the next nuclei, which is the main sensory nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. Then this is going to the facial nerve nuclei, then it is going to the facial nerve, which is basically going to the orbiculus oculi. So this is happening on the right side. Okay, now this projections from V1 is also going to the VS, and this is all responsible for the R1 component which is happening on the ipsilateral side. This projections are also going to the another nucleus, which is the spinal accessory nucleus. Now this is sending projections not only to the ipsilateral facial nerve nucleus but also to the contralateral facial nerve nucleus, which is left here in this example, and this is also going to have a seventh nerve and going to the orbiculus oculi of the left eye, causing the downward motion. So this is bringing your R2 component. Okay, so R2, you can see here, this is the R2 response. This is R2 response which is happening in both the eyes. So R1 is going to be happening in the ipsilateral eye, R2 is going to happening in both the eyes. Now another thing which is important is that we are saying that this is a blink response, but we have just talked about that only about the closure, not about the opening. So from here, that is from the accessory nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, that is this nucleus, the projections will also go bilaterally to oculomotor nuclei. Okay, so and this will go to bilaterally to the oculomotor nerve will take this to the bilateral elevator papillae, so cause the opening of the eyelid. So this is what is written in here, that we will also send the secondary inputs from the trigeminal spinal nucleus to oculomotor nucleus, and then activates a elevator papillae. The oculomotor pathway initiates the eyelid to reopen after it closes in the blink response. So that was about the corneal reflex, and it is having these components and the pathway explaining it. So the conjunctival reflex, as I already said, everything is almost the similar, only the difference is that the stimulus here is on the conjunctiva. So this is something which is already being written there, and you can make some changes here according to the previous slide. So you can add here the I forget to add actually the facial nerve, which and also the oculomotor nerve, the muscle also, and the synapses also, or the nuclei, the main sensory nucleus, the spinal accessory nucleus, the facial nucleus, and the oculomotor nucleus. So this is something which is same as that of the previous slide of the corneal reflex. Okay, and this is also something where the bilateral response is going to be coming. So now we are going to look for the clinical significance. So clinical significance first is a physiological significance, that the blinking of the eyelids is actually allowing the tears to be spread throughout the eye and also remove the irritants from the surface of the cornea and the conjunctiva. Now how we have also discussed this in the previous video in a very much detail, that basically checking the reflex, and if we are getting the response, that is actually helping us to know that the reflex arc is integrate or the reflex arc is intact. So basically this is helping us, the clinical significance is that checking reflex or knowing about the reflex arc is actually helping that all the components of the reflex are normal or not. So here we are going to take some examples to understand that how you can know that if there is any path, any component of the reflex arc is defective, in that case how will the blink reflex will come, and how can you actually diagnose it? So the peripheral nervous system components is something which is involving the reflex pathway, peripheral reflex pathway, which is involving the efferent and the efferent, the muscles and the receptors, which is a peripheral part. And central part is the central nucleus, the sensory nucleus, the trigeminal nucleus, and the facial and the oculomotor nucleus. Those are the central part. So let's start talking about that. Okay, so what happens if there is a problem with the conjunctiva or the cornea itself? In that case, basically, if the receptors are having problem, the nerve fibers, there is decrease in the density of the receptors, there is increase in the bending of the nerve fibers, and basically there is neuropathy, as in the diabetes or in the glaucoma. Basically, what happens that there is increase in the bending of the nerve fibers. All these are actually decreasing the sensitivity of the receptors, and hence the corneal reflex becomes less sensitive. So this is something like we have already discussed in the previous video, that if there is any part of the reflex arc is not functioning properly, you will not get reflex. So we are starting from the receptors. So if the receptors are not that much sensitive, the reflex also become less sensitive. So now the next thing which is there is that if there is a problem with the efferent, so if the trigeminal nerve is being damaged, and here we are taking a case like if there is a unilateral trigeminal nerve damage, so in that case what will happen? If the suppose if the right trigeminal nerve is damaged, in that case the inputs, the sensory inputs, they are not going to be taken. So in that case, definitely, because the inputs are absent, even though the efferent is normal, even though the central components are normal, no reflex is going to become, no component R1 R2, nothing will going to become. So this is showing that only. This is electrophysiological recording of the response. So we have placed the electrodes and we are recording the change in the potentials. So you can see that this is the normal response, that is the R1 component on the right side, because we are stimulating on the right side. So R1 component is normal, R2 component is also there, which is coming normally on both the side. If there is a unilateral trigeminal nerve damage, in that case no response has came, not R1, not R2. Okay, then the next case is that if there is a facial nerve damage, so here the problem is with the efferent, not with the efferent. So if there is a problem of the efferent which is on the right side, suppose you are stimulating on the right side and the problem is on the right side only, so what will happen? Stimulation of affected side manifest as absent reflex ipsilaterally, because both the R1 and the R2 components of the same side will require the facial nerve, and that is being damaged, but the facial nerve of the other side is present. So the R2 component which comes opposite side will come. So this is showing the same thing. The right is totally absent because the problem is there in the efferent, but the left side is showing the normal thing because the efferent of the left side is totally normal, as well as the efferent of the stimulation side is normal. Then next we come, like if there is a damage with the orbiculus oculi, so same as the facial nerve damage, the reflex will it will show the same pattern. If there is bilateral damage of any of these, also they will be definitely absent reflex bilaterally. Then comes the central nervous system components. So like if there is a damage to the main sensory nucleus, so we know that the main sensory nucleus is involved in bringing the R1 component. So the R1 component is going to be present, but because the other nucleus, which is the trigeminal spinal accessory nuclei, is normal, the R2 component is going to be present on both the sides. So you can see, okay, so here just a second. So here the R2 component will also present. Okay, so this is a mistake in putting the graph. So R2 component will also present on the ipsilateral side as well as on the contralateral side. So in the text it is being written correctly. So and the last thing which is very very important, even though you forget all these things, you must remember that corneal reflex and congenital reflex are also being used to confirm the death of the person. So we are at the end of this video. These are the references you can look. The major content is being taken from these two. This is a book and this is an article from the PubMed. I have shared the reference of it on the first slide, so you can go and read if you have any doubts from these references. We are at the end of this video. If you like this video, please like, share and comment. Do let me in the comment section like what topic you like your next video. Thank you. Thanks for watching and keep learning.